Steven Carr, and today we have a special guest with us, one and only Mike Jones of the Pennsylvania 93rd District State Representative, freedom fighter and a fighter for York, PA. He's been a school board teacher and state representative. What else have you been?
Most of my career, I was a businessman. So I was had the I first got out of school. I worked for a military contractor down in Northern Virginia for a few years, and then had the real pleasure and honor of going to work for a great company, kind of one of the best hidden secrets in York County, St. Ange Company. Started there in '94, worked there for 23 years, and my last 11 years, I served as president of that company when Mr. St. Ange retired. So St. Ange was actually a world-renowned consulting firm in the area of supply chain strategy and distribution, manufacturing, facility design, and then retired from there in 2017. Had an employee at the time who was on the Dallastown School Board, and there was a vacancy coming up. So he asked me to run for school board, which I did. I was elected to school board in 17. But in the interim, Scott Wagner, as you know, who was state senator at the time and even a far more successful businessman than myself and an entrepreneur, was running for governor. And so there was two different aspects of that. First of all, he in effect created the opening for me to run, because when he ran for governor, he gave up his Senate seat, and then Kristen Phillips Hill, who was my predecessor as the state rep, decided to run for state Senate. So that opened up her seat, and with her support and the support of a lot of people in the business community and others, I decided to run for state rep in 2018. Was fortunate enough to be elected, and then actually served as both the state rep and a school board member, overlapped for the better part of a year. It's one of the few examples where you can hold two elected positions concurrently, but not necessarily. It's one of those things, because you can do it, it doesn't necessarily mean you should do it. Because as the rep, I at the time covered all or parts of 5 different school districts. It's 4 now. I have all of Dallastown, a small part of Red Lion, a significant part of Southeastern, and a little bit of Southern. So with the potential for conflicts of interest and obviously competing for time and so forth, I stepped down from the Dallastown School Board in late 2019, and been a state rep ever since. In my 7th year, my 4th term here in the 93rd district.
So, as a school board member, what issues did you tackle back then?
We, fortunately, at the time, there wasn't a lot of controversy, because it was pre-COVID. Dallastown has a pretty long history, as I understand it. Like any other district, there had been some, there had been a superintendent who was a little bit of a lightning rod prior to my getting on school board. But during my, and keep in mind, I was only on school board for a little less than 2 years. It was a fairly uneventful time, certainly not controversial. In my case, our big things were, I had a couple of local issues we dealt with. We had a parking controversy at the time that I kind of helped with, but the relative to some of the neighborhoods surrounding the school. But the biggest things we did is we had a pretty major expansion project for Loganville Elementary School, and then so I kind of wanted to stay on the board until we got that under contract and underway. And then the most important thing was we hired a new superintendent during my tenure. Our previous superintendent, Ron Dyer, had retired, And ended up being a pretty easy decision for us because we were blessed to have a good, strong assistant superintendent, Josh Dahl, who's now continues to be the superintendent at Dallastown. But I did stay on through that process as we interviewed different candidates and so forth. They were just starting to enter into some contract negotiations, so I kind of weighed in on that, but I was off the board before the heavy lifting on the contracts, and then of course COVID came. I guess it would have been a couple years after that. So a lot of the real tough school board issues, as you know, were around COVID and masking and whether to open or close schools. And Dallastown had some a really interesting, passionate late night debate. They thought they had a 5-4 vote to close schools. And after midnight, it was live streamed like we're doing now. And there were a lot of people watching. And one of the board members was convinced to flip after midnight. And they ended up keeping schools open, which I, of course, was happy with. But anyway, I wasn't there for all that excitement, but I was watching from the sidelines and was certainly happy with that particular decision.
Yeah, they definitely, I mean, the 2020 was certainly a contested year for school boards and businesses all over York County and states for sure. I mean, I know I looked back on the ones in 2020. I wasn't involved then, but Southwestern, they, most of the 5 that are on there now had all spoken up for keeping the schools open and no masking and all that stuff, and but hardly anybody really showed up to watch it. They still don't show up to watch it or still show up to have their voice heard or hear what's really going on, and they just assume that we're doing a bad job or we're doing a good job. Now we have everything live streamed, and now our contested issues are the bathroom, for gender identity bathrooms and different policies that are controversial that's been going on. And so yeah, that's a lot of what stuff that's happening now from 2023.
Yeah, we were sorry, Darren. Yeah, we were just now that you mention it, we were, as I was toward the end of my tenure on school board, we were just getting into some of the bathroom type stuff. As you can imagine, I'm adamantly opposed to having biological males competing against girls or young women in the case of college. You can identify, how it's a free country. You can identify how you choose. And I think we can, in most cases, accommodate those students, with gender neutral bathrooms or staff bathrooms or other. There's different ways we look to accommodate it in Dallastown. But to exploit that physical advantage over girls, to me, is cowardly, quite frankly. Fortunately, it was never anything that I struggled with. But if someone were, if you're a boy that thinks you want to be a girl and identify as such, there's nothing that keeps you from doing that while still competing on boys' teams. There's no rule against a girl, and certainly not against a biological male, for example, playing football or any sport. So because you identify a certain way doesn't mean you're entitled to then exploit that on the athletic field, not only unfairly competing, but in some cases, depending on the sport, putting at risk the physical safety of girls. Same thing with the bathrooms. Because you want to identify a certain way, we can make accommodations for that. I don't think that means that a biological male should get to just use the girls' bathroom and violate their privacy, or vice versa. I mean, typically the bigger concern is a male, putting females at risk, but in the other direction as well. I mean, to throw the rights to fair competition and safe competition and personal privacy away for hundreds or thousands of students to accommodate a small handful, that seems illogical and unfair, from my perspective. With that said, so as you can imagine, I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody, I'm adamantly opposed to boys and girls sports. I've co-sponsored the bills in Harrisburg that my colleague Barb Gleim and others have championed. Signed a discharge resolution to try to force a vote on that. The Democrats played games and pushed it from one committee to another. They don't want to put it to a vote because, first of all, they'll probably have a few members break ranks who are worried about losing elections, and they just don't want to go on record having to vote on it. It's amazing that we're even, being 56 years old in my case, or really any age, it's amazing we're even having some of these ludicrous discussions, that we would somehow allow a male to exploit our girls. I mean, when you don't protect your own daughters, of which I have two, something's very wrong with society and upside down. Now, with that said, whenever this subject comes up, if I may elaborate a bit more, and whenever I'm talking to conservative audiences, I want to be crystal clear. These kids are not the enemy, okay? These are kids that are sorting through, it's not easy. I always cringe, and I don't hear it as much as I did kind of growing up. But, we always had this phrase. I don't know if you heard it. You're younger than I am. But, these are the best years of your life, meaning high school.
Mm-hmm.
For most kids, these are not the best years of their life, okay? And I cringe when I hear that. I know it's not malicious, but first of all, if high school is the best years of your life, that first of all means you're not much of an adult. Second of all, and more importantly, I used to be years ago, I was a volunteer youth leader and I taught high school, 11th and 12th grade Sunday school for a number of years. So I have a heart for teenagers. And for many of them, these are very stressful times. Especially that middle school, 9th and 10th grade, first couple of years of high school, when you're dealing with everything from body image to acne to the fact that you from a young man's perspective, the girls have no interest in you when you're in 9th or 10th grade. You can't drive a car. They're going for the older boys and all of that. Girls have all kinds of challenges, going through those years. They're very tough years for kids. And now you see a lot of them struggling with their sexuality and or gender. And I think it's a sign of society. I think in a lot of cases, there's no one bucket to put everybody in. And to be clear, there is a very, very small number that are born with sort of mixed genitalia, and that's a real unique, tragic situation. So just so nobody nitpicks, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a clear-cut biological male or female. The human brain doesn't even fully develop until 26. Okay, so this is one reason it's so dangerous, by the way, for kids to be drinking or using drugs at a young age. A lot of people think, well, as long as they don't drive, we take their keys, it's all right. Well, that's only part of the equation. The younger you start drinking, the much more likely you are to become an alcoholic. And so in a similar vein, why would we possibly want to entertain irreversible procedures, be it hormonal, puberty blockers and so forth, much less surgeries, which some of the Democrats are advocating, and all of them indicated a willingness to vote for it on House Bill 300 last year, which was a horrific bill, for children that are largely confused and just trying to sort things out. So I think what we need to do is to protect them. And that would include accommodating, some kind of gender-neutral bathroom or whatever. And we need to love them unconditionally, okay? and just let them work through this. Again, I've said already, I'm 56 years old. I don't know one person, not one, um, who as an adult is saying they wish they would have had a sex change. Now I know they're out there, but I know a lot of people. I went to school with a lot of people. I've observed a lot of people. I don't know of one. Now all of a sudden we've got two, sometimes three kids in the same household that are struggling with either sexuality or gender identity. Now that's a heck of a coincidence that 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 kids or 2 out of 2, which at least begs the question: is this a real? Are they really, born in the wrong body, so to speak? Which I don't subscribe to as a Christian, of course. But or is this stuff that's being planted in their head between either by parents or other woke type adults or social media? It's just why all of a sudden is this so prevalent? And I'm not trivializing it, and I don't doubt that the struggle was real for many of these kids. But how about we just protect them, love them unconditionally? Again, they're not the enemy, okay? They're kids. But let's not, but that doesn't mean we have to encourage it and much less enable it through irreversible, surgeries and procedures, nor embrace it to the extent that we put our own girls at risk. I mean, there's plenty of room for a happy medium here that is still, a loving, caring approach without getting into all of this craziness and really, in some cases, just outright evil that we're seeing. I mean, the idea of performing sex change surgeries on minor children, which is what occurs in some parts of the country and what some people advocate for. What we felt House Bill 300 put forth by the Democrats last session would have clearly opened the door for. That's evil. I mean, that's called genital mutilation. And so, I think we can, again, love these kids, protect them, care for them, but also protect them by making sure they don't go down an irreversible path that many come to regret later on. I think they just, most cases, they need time to sort through this. And if as an adult, that's where they still are, they're certainly free to do what they choose at that point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, before they even make that decision, I think that's the big thing. Is just that they're not getting enough love, maybe from their parents, and they just aren't the right direction to go in. The guidance. I mean, a lot of parents are now working and whatnot, and they're being peer influenced in schools. And of course, on down the line from the indoctrination from the unions and stuff like that is dragging into the schools, saying, "Hey, we need to, we want to say, we need to feel this way or feel that way or regulate their emotions, or because these children are at a young age where they are so easily impressionable,
Yep.
and easily mold. And it's even starting as low as grade K through 5th grade. And that's
you're 100% correct. I think on most of that, Stephen. I use the example again. I don't trivialize any of this. I don't doubt that some of the kids it's a struggle, but I fortunately this is not something I struggled with. I always liked being a boy and a man. I think it's actually very tough to be a woman. I think us men generally have it a lot easier. But the sexuality stuff and the gender identity was something that I, like most people, didn't struggle with. But I also, loved and adored and continue to. They're both still living, luckily, my parents. Now they didn't do this, to be crystal clear. And again, I was pretty much a all boy, so to speak, growing up. But I'll use an example. I loved Batman, right? Okay, Batman was my favorite superhero, still is. And I had these Batman dolls. Now, in my case, to be clear, it wasn't Barbie dolls. It was Batman and the Joker and the Penguin and Robin and all that. So this isn't, a great example. But if my mother, or certainly in my case, my father had said, "Hey, you like playing with these Batman dolls," or in some cases, the mother, wish they had a girl. This happens. If my mother had, um, you know, uh, treated me like a girl, if my dad said, "Hey, I think you might be gay, or I think you might be, um, trans or whatever," if that drum was continually beat into my head, like it is with some children, and I'm not a fly on the wall in all these households, and I know it's not this cut and dry, but my point is, even a quote, even a typical heterosexual male like myself, at a young age, getting back to your point, if I had parents who took wokeness and political correctness, or maybe some own issues of their own, to an extreme, and continued to beat into my head that I was something that I wasn't, I would probably start to believe that, for the exact same reasons that it's terrible to tell a kid that they're dumb, or to tell them that they're fat, or to tell them that that they can't succeed, that they're unlovable. These are terrible things to put into a child's brain, because they are so impressionable, especially if it's coming from parents or others, adults that they respect. So, because we've had tomboys forever. I can give you a couple of examples. Um, where girls, they prefer hanging out with the boys. They prefer playing sports with the boys. They might even dress like the boys. That doesn't mean they want to be a boy. Okay. That just means they like those things. There's boys that, that do like playing with Barbie dolls, or dressing up, or whatever they may want to do. Plenty of stories. 99% of the time, they grew out of it. Okay. And yeah, there's a 1% out there who end up doing whatever they need to do as an adult. But the vast majority of these kids, this stuff's always going on, and they grow out of it. But when you now insert some adult in there, parent or otherwise, that instead of just, like I said, loving them and letting them do their thing and figure this stuff out, they start to encourage, and not only embrace, but encourage this stuff. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, in my opinion. Either that, or something has dramatically changed in the last 10 or 20 years, because this was largely, never an issue in my generation, previous generations, even for that matter, my kids, who are in their, anywhere from early to late 20s. It's almost like it's trendy. And again, I'm not putting every kid in that bucket, and I'm not trivializing the struggles, but I really wonder how much of this is a societal influence, and or a peer influence, and or in some cases a parental influence. But I do think we as conservatives, while we can condemn uh, some of these, some of this philosophy and policy, whatever you want to call it, we have to be very careful that we don't villainize the children themselves, because they're just kids, and we need to love them unconditionally and protect all of them.
Yeah, I totally agree. I always go by the philosophy, that Jesus Christ went by, love the sinner, not the sin. And, that way, if you keep that in mind, that, they're just a sinner and a human being just as us, but it's the action that actually counts. So you still treat them equally.
Well, and I agree. It's interesting you said that, because as I talked about, especially if I'm talking with conservative audiences, because I do want to, while I was a little disappointed with the Bush family politically, as you can imagine, the last few election cycles, I did always love that phrase, compassionate conservative, that George W. Bush embraced. And I think we can be compassionate and kind while still being very, steadfast and undeterred in pursuing what is right. And to your point, I say, look, this isn't a sin that I struggled with, but trust me, I had plenty of other sins in my life, and I am in every bit as much a need of a savior as these kids, or for that matter, adults that are struggling with gender identity or any number of other things. Jesus had to die for me. I was, like I said, in much of a need of a savior as they are, and he died every bit as much for them as he did for me. And I couldn't agree with you more on that front.
Yeah. Let's talk about the state budget. And what the I know.
We can't just ignore that, I guess, son. Move on. You wouldn't be doing your job if we didn't talk about the state budget. Well, if you don't mind, go ahead. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
About it.
Yeah, it's a mess. What's your next question?
It's a mess. Yeah. So it's been what now? 4 or 5 months that we don't have a state budget. So it's like 100 and some days now.
Yeah, I think it's a little less. It's supposed to be done the end of June. So July, August. Yeah, we're 3.5, almost 3.5 months from when we were supposed to have one. Recent years, it's not uncommon that it drifts a week or two into July. At one point, we thought that's what was going to happen this year. The last big budget stalemate was right before I took office. So I think that was in 2018. Could have been 2017. In any event, so if you don't mind, I want to put some numbers to this, because I will confess, even myself, I did not realize how bad a trajectory we're on. And so in this case, the numbers are important. So I tried to jot all this down for your audience to make sure that we get it right. So I'm going to let me start by saying, and I'm not to insinuate. I'm trying to straighten my collar and everything's backwards here. So what I think is left is right. You need to understand, and this will sound like a cop-out, but it's just political reality. So I'm a Republican in the House. We are in the minority by 1 seat. So the Democrats have a 102 to 101 majority. Well, that might as well be a 50-seat majority, because they control everything. So, if you want to call it passing the buck, that's fine. But Republicans in the House, like myself, are virtually powerless to do anything about the budget other than to completely roll over and embrace fiscal irresponsibility, which I'm going to get to in a second, which we're not going to do that. And in theory, even that doesn't matter, because the Democrats have passed 2 budgets, I should say, out of the House, basically, give or take, reflecting the governor's budget. Some minor cuts, and they weren't even really cuts. They were more like adjusting of different estimates to bring the spend down a little bit. So conversely, a Democrat in the Senate, there's not much they can do either, because the Republicans control the Senate. So there's really only 3 parties here that really matter. And that's the governor. He's got to sign the budget, obviously. That's the majority leader in the House and the majority party, which in this case is Matt Bradford, Democrat Matt Bradford, who is the House majority leader. Okay. And then you have the majority leader in the Senate, which is kind of a combination. The majority leader is Pittman. And then in that case, you could, you also have Kim Ward, who is the Senate pro tem, and to some extent, Joanna McClinton in the House, who's the Speaker of the House. But in any event, on the Senate side, you have Ward and Pittman, because they have, they've to their credit, they've been able to keep their people together. I think we have a 2-seat majority in the Senate, but they have stuck. And to Bradford's credit, Leader Bradford's credit, on the Democrat side in the House, he's kept all 102 of his people together. He can't really afford to lose 1 vote That's not totally true because he can probably get 2 or 3 Republicans, depending on the issue, to break ranks. But he has to. So it's a challenge for the leaders to keep their people together. But in general, safe to assume they have the majority of the vote. So Bradford, the Democrat leader in the House, does not need us on the Republican side. And conversely, Pittman and Ward don't need the Democrats in the Senate, assuming that everybody sticks together. And then, of course, you got to have the governor because he has to sign it. Well, at this point, we think the governor would sign most anything. But the real holdup is the House Democrats. And that's because Bradford is dealing with the left wing of his party. And I've even seen this in my 7 years in the House. More and more of what we would call moderate or at least somewhat reasonable Democrats have been replaced by very liberal or in some case self-avowed socialist Democrats. So the Democrat Party is gradually been taken over by the far left. Everybody wants to say that we've both gone far left and right. That's actually not true. Trump has brought, as you know, I'm sure, Stephen, but Trump has actually brought policy-wise the Republican Party more toward the center, most of which I'm happy about, with the exception of abortion, which I'm not happy about. I was actually a delegate to the National Convention and was one of the few that voted against the platform because of Trump's softening of the language on life. With that one very noteworthy exception, I'm a strong proponent generally of the president's, not always his personality, but certainly his policy. But his policies, if you look, anything from tariffs to securing the border to ending wars across the world, these were all traditionally Democrat notions that Trump has now embraced. Criminal justice reform to some extent, which we need to do even more there. And the abortion issue. Now, on the other hand, he also gave us the Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe v. Wade. But my point is, it's real easy just to say, well, the Republicans are going right and the Democrats are going left. That's actually not the case. Policy-wise, for the most part, Trump's a bit more nationalistic. You could argue that. But beyond that, he's brought the party more toward the center. The Democrats, in the meantime, and this is relevant to the budget, have had more and more, like the AOCs of the world, coming in and taking over the party. And even if they don't have the majority, they're louder voices and they strike fear in the more reasonable Democrats who are worried about getting primaried, quite frankly. So does that make sense? So Bradford in the state house has this left wing of his party who just wants to spend. And as we're going to talk here in just a second, because ultimately they don't mind raising taxes. They probably think we should raise taxes. Okay. So you got to understand what's at work here. The Republicans in the Senate are at the same time conversely kind of are saying, we're going to burn through all of our reserves and rainy day fund, our surplus and rainy day, if we keep spending like we're spending. So with that said, let me put some numbers to this. And so last year's budget, we're going to talk last year, and then we're going to jump back in time 5 years, and I'll bring you forward. Last year's budget was right around $47.7 billion. But we only had revenues, so I'm going to try to keep the numbers relatively round. $47.7 billion was the budget, was the spend. But our revenues were only 44.2. That's a $3.5 billion structural deficit. So last year we spent $3.5 billion more than we took in. And $3.5 billion at the federal level is almost a rounding error. But here you're talking, we're over budget by like 8%, which is substantial. Okay. So where did that money come from? Well, if you go back to 2021, we also had a deficit of about $2 billion. Okay. But COVID came along And COVID, because of people staying home or working from home, a lot of them. And as you recall, a lot of things took off. Car sales, they started buying cars. They didn't have like the money to spend on travel and other things, and they weren't going out as much, but they were buying cars and decks, on putting additions. Like when I say decks, I mean putting additions on their home, doing all this kind of stuff. So tax revenue actually increased. And more importantly, the federal government was pumping money into Pennsylvania. I think about $8 billion or so over the course of a couple of years. So, let me check my notes here a second so everybody gets the right numbers. By the end of 2021, the budgets run from July 1st to June 30th. So the 2020-21 budget, where it looked like we were going to have a deficit, we ended up, and keep in mind, we can't print money like the federal government. Okay. So we are supposed to have a balanced budget. Now there's some games that are played there, plenty of games, but in general, to keep an already convoluted conversation a little simpler, in general, the state certainly can't print money. There's some games we can play with borrowing money here and there, like Wolf did years ago, borrowing against the farm show, for example. But in general, you can only spend what you take in, or you're going to have to raise taxes. But understand that continuing to raise taxes, which is another issue we'll get to in the interview, I'm guessing, chases more business and more young people out of the state, which is really the biggest problem we have as a state. But we'll table that for now. So you can only play the tax game for so long. And everybody says, well, tax the rich people. Well, the problem with taxing rich people is you run out of rich people, okay, because they move, okay? It's not that complicated. And you're left with taxing the poor people, and all you've done is made them more poor. In any event, so at the end of 21, because of COVID, increasing revenues and federal dollars, we ended up with a $2.6 billion surplus. Republicans were in charge then, keep in mind. Instead of spending that like the Democrats wanted to do, we put all of that into the rainy day fund. Okay. So at that point, we had 2.6. Over the next 2 years, so that would be the 22, 23, and 20, or apologize. It'd be 21, 22, and 22, 23. So through 23, 21 through 23. Okay. Mainly because of federal dollars that we were handed. So ultimately it was deficit spending. The federal government kept printing money, but through the COVID rescue fund or whatever they called it, they sent a bunch of money to the states, including Pennsylvania, of course. Our general fund at its peak had an $8.1 billion surplus, and the rainy day fund had $6 billion. Those are two separate buckets. They effectively are all kind of the same bucket. That's all our surplus. By putting it in the rainy day fund, it raises the bar as to what we need to be able to spend it. So they're not exactly the same. But at the peak in 23, we were sitting on about 14 billion extra dollars. Okay. Makes sense. So the challenge you then have is, well, we need to recognize it's rainy day fund, and we need to save a lot of this money for a rainy day, which typically means, in the extreme, means a disaster like COVID, but would typically mean a recession, which we're overdue to have a recession. On the other hand, it's just like school districts carry a surplus, okay? But if they carry too much, then you got to say, well, why are you sitting on this money and still raising property taxes? Well, in this case, we're sitting on 14 billion, and the Democrats want to spend it, okay? So then they'll say, well, why aren't you giving money to this cause or that cause? Some of which are worthy, by the way. We need to take care of people that are disabled. We need to take care of the elderly. We need to, that sort of thing. We have an obligation to fund education, so on and so forth. But they're saying you're sitting on all this surplus. We should be spending it. We're generally saying, well, we need that for when the economy goes down. It's more rainy day mindset. Okay, so the last 2 years, we have, with Democrats controlling the House and Shapiro in the governor's office. And you need to remember, Shapiro wants to be president. Okay. So he is more than happy to spend to take credit for whatever he may think that spending does. So he can then say, I increased funding for education, or we invested. He loves to say invest. It's very difficult for governments to invest. If you want to invest, give the money back to the people. Governments basically are very inefficient and they just waste money. But, he'll say infrastructure investments and so forth. There's a little bit of truth to that. Obviously, you need to have bridges and roads and so forth. But in any event, and there's a lot of union giveaways in there and so forth. So they've been spending. Okay. So that what was 14 billion is now down to about 10 or 11 billion in just 2 years. So at the end of 25, we have our general the general fund surplus, which was 8 billion, is now down to about 3.5 billion. Okay, in just 2 years. The rainy day fund, which was 6 billion, is actually sitting at 7 billion. So net, we are sitting on about 11 billion, but that had been 14 billion just 2 years ago. So, and then there's some extra spending that occurred in there. So it's really more like 10 billion. So we're sitting on about 10, 11 billion dollars. And our Governor Shapiro put forward a budget that would spend 51 billion. Our revenues are only projected, there's a slight increase. Our revenues are only projected at 44.5 billion. Okay. So he wanted to spend 5 or 6 billion more than we take in. If you then project that to just one more year, he would have spent all of the rainy day fund, all of the budget surplus, and we would come up short in just 2 more years. He would burn through all of it, and he would have no choice but to raise taxes at that point. Okay. Now, but at that point, it's 2 more years. He's running for president. He doesn't care. Okay. First of all. Second of all, if it means raising taxes, he and the Democrats don't have an issue with raising taxes. Third, he throws out a bunch of nonsense about taxing skill games and marijuana. Okay. Well, first of all, you got to pass that stuff. But marijuana, if you legalize recreational marijuana, might generate, I think they project about 400 million in tax revenue. It's a relative drop in the bucket. Keep in mind, there's already a lot of people using medical marijuana. Okay. So by quote legalize, and we're not prepared to legalize marijuana. That you have to pass. That's a whole debate around whether that should even occur. But even if it did, you're talking like 400 million. And then skill games are going to be a relative drop in the bucket. And if they tax them as high as they're talking about taxing them, a lot of these tavern owners are just going to pull them out because there won't be enough money to keep them. When you start taxing stuff at 30%, the governor wanted to tax at 50%. The Senate seems willing to go 30%. The industry is saying 16%. If you tax things to death, they just go away because there's no money there. Okay. So the bottom line is if we spent like he wanted to spend, he can talk about all these great programs and so-called investments that we're making. Okay. Most of the money he's investing in education, for example, was just throwing good money after bad on failing schools. Okay. As one example. So he would burn through all of the rainy day and surplus in 2 years, leaving us with no choice but to increase taxes. And heaven help us if we hit a recession during that period. Okay. What I actually was not aware of until recently is that, so then the Senate in the meantime, so the Shapiro budget, which the House basically passed, is sitting at 50 billion, spending about 5.5 more billion than we're going to take in, therefore burning through that 10 or 11 million dollars in just 2 years. Make sense? The Senate flatline spending. Mm-hmm. The Senate did pass a budget. Okay. We passed budgets. They just can't agree. The Senate passed a budget months ago that flatline spending at 47.7. You've seen us. We did some videos led by Senator Dawn Kiefer where we said hold the line at 47.9. There's some there's a word I'm looking for, but some extra spending, supplemental type spending that if you approve that would get you to 47.9. So that's where the 47.9. So we were saying, and I was in that camp, am in that camp, hold the line at 47.9, which means just flatline spending. Okay. Yeah. But understand, and this is the part, because we've always heard that the revenue, so when the state talks revenue, they'll say we had 47 or 47.5 or whatever. That's not accurate because it ignores the 2 billion that we send back to people in refunds and tax credits. So even the Senate budget that flatlines spending is still a $2 to $3 billion deficit spending, depending on what revenue projections you look at. The governor's assuming like 45.5 billion in revenue. The independent fiscal office is at like 45.5. So even with the Senate bill flatlining at 47.9, we're still got a structural deficit of, call it, it's two to three, call it 2.5 billion. So even at that pace, we would burn through the surplus and the rainy day in 5 or 6 years. Okay. So we got drunk on this COVID money a few years ago. And at the time, I actually did a little video clip in conjunction with Americans for Prosperity, I believe it was. It might have been American Conservative Union. And I said, don't send us this money. Okay. And you say, well, why in the world would you not want $7 or $8 billion of free money from the federal government? This is exactly why, because they sent that money and then we started spending more than we're bringing in. And now we're paying the price. We'd have been more disciplined on spending 4 or 5, because keep in mind, every year you spend, and Republicans are guilty of it too, just not as guilty as the Democrats. Every year you spend, you then spend more the next year. So it's the trajectory you put yourself on. When I got to Harrisburg just 7 years ago, the budget was 30 some billion. Now we're pushing 50 billion in just 7 years. It's insane. But what happened is, like I said, we got drunk on that COVID money. Okay, quote, free money. Why wouldn't you want to take it? Well, this is why you don't take it, because we had that money and we put ourselves on a trajectory of spending even more and more. And everybody lacks the discipline, to make necessary cuts. If we'd have controlled the spending, okay, and to our credit, we did put it in the rainy day fund. Okay, the Republicans did at least push something in the rainy day fund. The Democrats would have spent it all. It wouldn't even be there right now. We would be having the tax discussion right now if they had their way. But all we did, we kicked the can down the road 2 years with the governor. We kicked the can 5, 6 years down the road with the Republican plan. And a lot of it stems back to taking this federal money. Okay, it's just like at the local level. If you get on school board, you take the state dollars and then they own you. Okay. So sorry for the very long answer, but it's a very important question and it's important to get it right. So there's no way in the world that I would vote for a budget that spends more than the 47.9. I'm thinking even that's too much now. And it looks like the Senate will stay strong. The last thing I will say, personally, my only caveat there is I would be willing to spend a little more than we should, not because I want to, if we got policy change. This isn't just a spend amount. It's also what policy change we get with the budget. And the biggest thing in Pennsylvania, we could use some improvements to our tax policy. We did, at least while we were in the majority as Republicans, we're on a trajectory, and even the governor supports this, of reducing corporate net income tax. But our regulatory environment is just killing us. We can't even compete with Maryland and New Jersey half the time. Definitely can't compete with Ohio, and continually lose jobs and investment and young people with it, working age and their children, to places like North Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Georgia, generally Republican-run states that are much more business friendly. And we keep passing dumb bill after dumb bill in the House that guys like myself, we always vote against, that are so business unfriendly, that it's costing us a ton of money. The biggest single culprit is DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection. The excessive regulations they put on businesses and on development are just killing us. And then you layer in PennDOT and some of the stuff they do. And then you layer in the fact that we're a litigious state, meaning there's a lot of crazy lawsuits. This terrible state Supreme Court we had just reintroduced what they call jury shopping, where you can have a case in York but try to have it tried in Philadelphia, on and on. We should be an economic powerhouse. You got the governor wanting to do this stupid regional greenhouse gas initiative that would, we have a huge resource called natural gas right under our feet. We want to shoot ourselves in the foot on that as well. So if we have any chance of avoiding raising taxes down the road, which again, I would never vote for, because I would say we got to cut spending if we have to. And again, even the tax game is a short-sighted play. Because raising taxes does not always increase revenue, certainly long term. We've got to get some of these onerous regulations off of our businesses back. We've got to embrace a pro-energy policy that allows us to grow. We should be an economic powerhouse, yet we are continually ranked 40th, 43rd, 37th in economic, from an economic development perspective. We're blessed that our geography is good, because as a supply chain guy in a previous life that we talked about, luckily, it's the reason you see so many distribution centers. We're close to a lot of people. So our geography is good, and our rich manufacturing tradition, history, especially here in York, is what really sustains us. But, you don't see a lot of business, because I used to do this work. You don't see a lot of businesses wanting to come into Pennsylvania. The governor will do a couple, he'll tout one or two here and there. It's a drop in the bucket. We have more leaving than coming. And mainly that's because of government tax credit giveaways that are also short-sighted and short-lived. So all that to say, if we could get real regulatory reform, which I don't think is going to happen, but if we got real meaningful regulatory reform, I might be willing to trade that for a little excess spending, not a lot, but a little, in the hopes that we could revitalize our economy and start growing rather than shrinking. Currently, we are getting older, smaller, and poorer by the day, which hopefully we can talk about a little bit because of these policies. If we could reverse that, and then revenues come up through growth, not higher taxes, that might be our saving grace. But we better get after it very quickly.
So I've been outdoor knocking for my school board campaign, and a lot of the older people are concerned about property tax and the school taxes being high and chasing out residents and having people move and so forth. One person said, or told me that how come it that if I'm a landlord person and I own property, but how come those people that are renting my property or renting from me don't have to pay that property tax, but I do, and they don't have to pay anything?
Well, that's I would take a little exception with that. The renters do pay property tax indirectly. It is true that on paper, the landlord is paying the property tax and the renters aren't. That's one of many challenges with getting property tax reform. I am a co-sponsor of a bill that Senator Kiefer and Representative Wendy Fink, both from York County, are championing, that was previously designed and championed by now retired Representative Frank Ryan, who is as credentialed as you could possibly be in the world of macroeconomics and accounting. But keep in mind, so one of the problems is when you talk about eliminating property tax, you have to increase sales tax and income tax. That's how we do it. But property tax is a totally regressive, unfair, unwise tax. And we're talking school property tax. I don't think many people have issues with the county property tax. But school tax is about 3/4 of total property tax paid.
Right.
You get pushback from renters because they're saying, well, now our taxes are going to go up, but because we don't pay property tax. Well, you do pay property tax, and it's in the form of your rent because the landlord passes that along, whether it's directly or indirectly. It might not show up as a line item that you're paying, but if I'm a landlord, the more my property taxes go up, I have to pass at least some, if not all of that along to my renters. So the renters are paying it indirectly. And in this bill, we force savings down to the renters to try to accommodate that. The other issue is Pennsylvania doesn't tax pensions. So you have a lot of people from Maryland or New York or elsewhere who worked their whole career out of state, paid taxes to those states where they were working, did not pay anything to Pennsylvania, and now come to Pennsylvania and still don't pay any tax because their pensions aren't taxed here. Not that I'm advocating for taxing anything, but you do have to get the revenue from somewhere. And so what this bill does is in round numbers, you take income tax from it's currently 3.07%, which is actually relatively low by a national standard. It's one of the few areas where we're pretty good. Obviously, there are some states with no income tax, but the national average is probably around 5 or 6, I'm going to guess. But we take income tax from just over 3% to 4.87 was the last number that I've heard. That this might have to change a little bit over time. So you have an increase in income tax, and it would tax pension income, but it would not tax Social Security. 2/3 of seniors have only the Social Security income. It would not tax Social Security, and it would not tax any pension income that the recipient themselves contributed. So if you were paying into a pension plan, you would only pay tax on the incremental part that you were getting back. And that's because people have to pay something. Now, there was the argument that, I don't have any children in school and all that. Well, a lot of people did have children in school at one point. We still benefit from having young people here. Somebody's got to fix the roads. Somebody's got to build your house. Somebody's got to replace, fix your plumbing and electric when it goes bad. You got to have young people. In the extreme, you need people to go fight war. So to say that, well, because I don't have kids, I shouldn't fund anything on schools, that's a little extreme too, in my opinion. I don't have kids in school now, but I did have 4 kids in school. And if heaven forbid we got into a major war or something like that, you're going to want my boys going and fighting that war, right? Or in a less extreme example, coming out and, my one son is hauling away your garbage, for example. So in any event, it would raise income tax from 3% to about 4.8. It would expand to tax pension income, but not Social Security income. And sales tax would go from 6% to 8%. And then it would expand to tax additional items. I think they just took food off the table, but it would expand to tax things like clothing that we don't currently tax. I think the tax on clothing and some services would only be 2%. But everything that's currently at 6 would go to 8. So it's an expansion of sales tax, an expansion of income tax. Keep in mind that on sales tax, sales tax is generally considered the fairest of all taxes because it's proportionate to how much you spend. It's a usage tax. And we would get revenue from out of state people. I don't know the exact percentage, but it could be as much as 20% or more of our sales tax is collected from people out of state. So that's incremental. That's tax revenue that wouldn't be coming from Pennsylvanians, that would be directed toward schools. If you do that, you can outlaw, and the key is to outlaw school property tax altogether. You can't just reduce it. You need to eliminate it. And the beauty of this is, and I'll shut up here, one of the fundamental problems with school tax, it only takes 5, as you know, it only takes 5 out of 9 board members to increase it, school board members. That's why most schools average an increase about every other year. Some are doing it virtually every year. Some hold the line for 4 or 5 years. If you shift to sales and income tax, and this is one reason most school board, not necessarily school boards, but like the PSBA, the School Board Association, and administrations are opposed to it because they see property tax as more predictable and more stable than sales and income tax. There's some truth to that, but generally those taxes are a lot more stable than people realize. Just like I was putting numbers out earlier. Last year, our revenues in Pennsylvania, which is a series of things, but largely sales and income tax, we're at 44.1 this year. They're at 44.5 or so. So they're pretty stable. And then there's the psychology of people saying, well, you're going to tax my pension. Well, we have it's online. You can go in and plug in your numbers. There's a whole spreadsheet tool, very easy to use. we estimate that 9 out of 10 seniors will actually save more money, most of them far more money, on property tax than it will cost them on their pension income. My parents, for example, they live in a modest home in Dallas town. I don't know what the property tax is. I'm going to guess it's $4,000 or $5,000, the school taxes. Um, my dad gets a pension from Caterpillar where he was a machine operator. I don't know exactly what that is, but I would guess that his income tax might go up 500, 800, $1,000. Okay. But he's going to save 4 or 5,000 on school property tax. And that would be a fairly typical example. So the seniors would still benefit, but they would contribute a little more income tax, not their Social Security, and a little more in sales tax. And then the money would also stay local at a county level, be a combination of county and state. So in any event, that's what we really need to do, in my opinion, on property tax. Whether you would retain property tax on business entities is another kind of debatable issue. But in any event, but to your original point, renters are paying property tax. They just don't see it as such. It's embedded in their rent. Like I say, is it dollar for dollar in all cases? Not necessarily, because rents are also driven by market factors, supply and demand. But rest assured, when the landlord's property taxes go up, at some point in time, that is going to trickle down to the renters.
So, in my view, I think everybody should pay the biblical 10% poll tax, because it would be affordable for poor and the rich. If we did a 10% poll tax.
As a general, well, and one nice thing is we do have a flat tax in Pennsylvania. So it's 3.07% for everybody. I don't know if that includes Social Security or not. I should know that, but I'm not certain. In any event, 3.07 flat tax. Now, the Democrats have tried. There's been some very modest efforts at making that like an escalating, I guess they call that a progressive tax. I feel like there's another word for it. But in any event, where you tax wealthier people at a higher percentage. It's actually in our state constitution to have a flat tax of 3%. So that's one of the few good things about our tax policy. If you compare us to other states, and I go to a couple of conferences every year where we get national experts on policy. We get people like myself from other states. And our income tax, particularly the fact it's relatively low at 3%, and it's flat, generally that's considered a good thing. I will say there's not a lot of benefit in taxing poor people, working poor in particular. Now, one of the things we got to do is make sure that all able-bodied people are working, which thankfully President Trump has set that in motion. And we need serious Medicare reform here in Pennsylvania. Another huge mistake we made a couple of years ago as a result of COVID was expanding the Medicare eligibility so that we now estimate we have tens of thousands of able-bodied single men with no children, for example, who don't work and are collecting government assistance. That's one of the ways we as Republicans would say that we could go about helping to balance our budget. But when you have the working poor, and a family of four, you'll hear different numbers, but it's something like if a family of four is making less than it's like $70,000 or $80,000, they are going to qualify for some sort of public assistance. In other words, so families that are making 50, 60 grand a year, to pile more tax on them is really counterproductive. At some point, you're disincentivizing work. And that's one reason some people aren't out working. They make more staying home than they do working. We have to address that. But at the same time, we have to reward work. I was one of Well, initially, I was the only Republican in committee earlier this year to vote for, and we don't generally like tax credits, but this was an earned income tax credit for working poor and incentivized work. I was the only Republican to vote for that on the finance committee, and then through some lobbying we ended up getting a bunch of Republicans. We got the leader on board, and we had a number of Republicans ultimately vote for it. But that was one way of trying to reward work, not just penalizing people playing the system, but rewarding those who are working. Because if you tax the working poor too much, they end up needing it. We end up spending more, keeping them on government assistance, if that makes sense. So we need to incentivize and reward work, and that's kind of where the balancing act comes in, because it's criminal to tax a retiree who worked their whole life to own a fairly modest $200,000 or $300,000 home, who is now on fixed income and effectively renting that home from the government, meaning property tax, and in some cases getting chased out of their homes. On the other hand, you can't shift all of the burden to young people or the working poor, because we need them here to help take care of those elderly folks. And we are on the precipice, I believe, of a major crisis. And I want you to ask whatever questions you want to ask, but if we could allow a few minutes to elaborate on our aging population, I would appreciate that.
Right.
You want me to go now? Okay, so I'm on Labor and Industry Committee, Intergovernment Affairs, which does almost nothing, which was a new committee created under the Democrat leadership. And but I'm on Labor and Industry, which has been the most contentious committee that I've sat on. Number of crazy bills, almost all of them anti-business again. We just had one that spoke out against unemployment for striking workers, for example. A lot of them were union paybacks. Almost all of them dead in the Senate. But in any event,
Bill 86, I think.
Yeah, might have been, Steven. I'm not certain of the exact number. It might have been. But I'm on Labor and Industry. I'm on finance. So it's things that play into my business experience, as opposed to, say, agriculture, which I love and care about, but I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment, so I don't know much about farming, right? I've learned a lot from some of my farming constituents. I'm not a veteran, so I don't tend to go on the Veteran Affairs Committee. I'm not a lawyer, so I have never requested judiciary. Not that you have to be on those committees, but I'm just illustrating the point. So I've tried to play to my strengths, which were the finance and labor and industry in my case, because I'm a business guy. But I've also elected to stay on the aging committee. That was one I was on as a freshman because it's not a real popular committee. But I've stayed on that committee because I think it's critically important. And here's what's happening. And this was predicted 20, 30 years ago because it's just math. And the nice thing about this is there's really not a whole lot you can debate as to what is occurring and what is going to occur. The bad news is there aren't too many solutions to it. Okay. It being our aging population. Okay. And we have it. It's a nationwide problem. For a society to sustain its population. I was just researching this the other day. You need a birth rate of 2.1 children per female. We are currently sitting at about 1.6. Okay. So that's a macro problem nationwide. Okay. The only way to address that is to hurry up and start having more children. And I don't see that happening. First of all, kids are expensive. But second of all, we see young adults. I was going through my family, many of my friends' families, relatives and so forth. I have 4 children in their 20s, 22 through 29. To date, they've produced 1 grandchild. Pleased to say I have a second one on the way. And that's not a critique of my kids. I think some of them are, I'm very proud of them and they're working hard and doing things the right way. I went through my friends who are, about my age, 56, give or take. Some of them a couple years older, actually. They have almost no grandchildren. I have one buddy with 3 sons, no grandkids. Another one with 2 sons, no grandkids. Another one with 2 sons, no grandkids. Another one with a son and a daughter, no grandkids. On and on. Almost, and that's a small data set, but I think it's very typical. Kids are waiting longer to get married, or young adults are, and they're having few or no children. At the same time, okay, the other way that you can address it is through smart legal immigration, okay, which I'll kind of circle back to. That's dangerous, using immigration and circle back in the same sentence. I don't want anybody thinking I'm Joe Biden here. But anyway, so as you're aware, I'm sure, after World War II, soldiers came home, started having babies, right? So that's what we call the baby boomers. Baby boomers, like parents, and I don't remember the exact dates, but baby boomers are basically born from 45 to, I think it goes to 1965. Okay, I think it's 20 years. Not all generations are 20 years, but it's something like that. So many of those baby boomers, like my dad was born in 43, my mom was born in 45. They're now 82 and 80 respectively, and they've long since left the workforce. We have this population bubble called the baby boomers that went into the workforce in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. They've become most of our senior talent, but are now leaving the workforce in droves. I'm reluctant to throw out numbers if I can't recall, but it's a big number that retire every year in this country. I'm reluctant to throw it out there. I thought it was like 10 million people a year retire, something like that. But in any event, so the baby boomers have largely aged out of the workforce and are going to continue to do so. They take work ethic and skill set with them. And this is a good thing, but it's a real challenging thing, they live longer than ever. They're going to live longer than ever. We have, again, take my stats with a grain of salt, but they're all directionally sound. I can never remember what we call somebody that lives to be 100. I always say centurion, but obviously it's not a centurion. But whatever we call them, I think versus 20 years ago, give or take, we have 10 times more people over 100 than we did just 20 or 30 years ago. Okay. The average life expectancy is getting older and older. Now, people will challenge that and say, wait a minute, Mike, the average life expectancy is actually flat or down a little bit. That's because of drug overdoses largely, and other deaths at younger ages that are occurring. That's a misleading statistic to say average life expectancy. What I mean by that is if the average life expectancy is 76, a guy like me that has already reached 56, and I might not be the best example because I'm not in the best shape, but in any event, my life expectancy is not 76. It's probably 85 or so because I didn't die at birth. I didn't die as a teenager. Wasn't in an accident. I didn't overdose. You see what I'm saying? So as you get a big bubble of seniors that are leaving the workforce and are aging, they're not going to die on average at 76. They're going to live to 86, 95, whatever it's going to be, which again is a good thing in and of itself. The problem is there's not enough young people coming behind them to take care of them. Financially, in part, which is one of the reasons we have the problems we have here in Pennsylvania, financially, we are I want to say the seventh or eighth oldest state in the country by median age. But the 6 or 7 that are older than us are mostly New England, almost all the New England states, with the exception, I think, of like Massachusetts. So they're kind of almost too small to count. I think Delaware might be older than us, but that's kind of a retirement destination. And Florida. But Florida doesn't really count either because that's rich old people. You follow me? And it's people leaving Pennsylvania. The people with the money are the ones that can afford to go to Delaware, that can afford to go to Florida. Okay. So I say this, I honor and I love and cherish old people. Okay. but you cannot operate a state on retirees. You need people out there working. We need to sustain our manufacturing jobs in York County. We need somebody, to go and mine the coal, to get the natural gas, to make the steel, and certainly to staff, to do home repairs, like I talked earlier, road repairs, volunteer firefighters. I mean, we were at 300 and some thousand volunteer firefighters in the 70s at a peak. We're now down to just over 30,000 statewide. I mean, these are scary numbers. Okay. And it's only going to get worse. Okay. It's not going to get better. This is what I was saying earlier. You can't really debate this. It's an actuarial exercise. We know how many seniors we have. We know how old everybody, we have 13 million people in Pennsylvania. We know how old they are. Next year, they're all going to be a year older. Some percentage of them are going to die. Some are going to move out. Even fewer are going to move in, and there's a certain amount of births. But it's all in all, it's pretty easy to predict. Okay. The only way you can reverse that is to start having more babies. Okay, which is very unlikely to happen, especially when you're chasing young people away because you have really crappy Department of Environmental Protection and PennDOT and others with excruciating regulations that calls business owners to say, we've had enough of this. We're going to pack up and leave. So they take not only their employees, but their employees' children with them. Meanwhile, you also have a handful of wealthy retirees who say, I'm sick of this property tax and other things. I'm going to Delaware or Florida, or I just like the weather better there. You follow me? Or they're going to follow their children who just went to Tennessee. So now we're left with more and more, and I say this in the nicest way possible, we're left with more and more relatively poor old people, okay, who I want to take care of. That's why I want better economic policy. And people need to realize the reason we don't have money to help fund dementia, research or special needs adults, which is going to be another issue because they're going to outlive their parents in some cases, okay, is because we have this terrible economic policy, tax policy, but especially regulatory policy that's chasing businesses away, that therefore reduces our tax revenue because they're the ones that generate wealth. Government doesn't generate wealth. Government doesn't invest, as the governor says. It's the private sector. When we chase them away, we lose that revenue. That's why we've now are facing the reality of a $3 billion surplus, even with a flatline budget. Okay. And we keep losing young people. So as you can see, that's why Rudders and Sheets pay $19 an hour. Okay. We can't get people to fill those jobs. We can't get enough welders and machinists. Okay. Some dumb policy there on apprenticeships and other things too. That's also union nonsense. Job protectionist policies from 40 years ago. Okay. On the ratios of apprentices to journeymen and that sort of thing. Okay. But here's where it's really going to hit the fan, and it's already starting to, and I think we would probably be appalled if we were to go do some surprise tours of nursing homes around the state. I don't think so much York County, because keep in mind, York is still relatively wealthy, relatively well populated versus much of the state. A lot of the state is rural poor with aging, shrinking populations. So our state is getting older. The only demographic that's growing in Pennsylvania is the over 80 demographic. It's definitely over 65. I think it's actually over 80. That's the only group that's growing. Okay. We are getting smaller. Our population has flatlined or even shrunk. The last couple of years, two or 3 years ago, we lost 40,000 people. A year or two ago, we lost like 10,000. I think last year or this year, we might flatline or gain a few thousand. But keep in mind, we're shrinking relative to the rest of the country, which is growing on average. What's the result of that? We lost another congressional seat. We lost another electoral vote, right? At the last census, I mean, you know this, we went from having 20 electoral votes to having 19. The reason we went to 19 is because you get, everybody gets 2 electoral votes for each senator, and then you get 1 per representative. We lost a member of Congress. We went from 18 representatives, 18 congressmen to 17, right? So that's less influence we have in Washington. Our populations and on average, we're getting poorer. If you look at real earnings, we're getting poorer. Okay. Again, because the companies aren't investing here in a serious way. Yeah. Shapiro, the governor, can point to one or two exceptions. Any state can do that. Any country can do that. Okay. A lot of that's because it's native Pennsylvanians who are loyal to the state, many of whom would have packed up and left a long time ago if they weren't, from Pennsylvania. Okay. Here's where it's really going to hit. And I'm afraid it already probably has. As I was saying, the nursing home crisis, or the elder care crisis, because it's not just nursing homes, it's in-home care as well, I fear is not just going to get worse, it's going to get exponentially worse. Because when you don't have staff, you don't just lose one bed, for example, in a nursing home. You close a whole wing, or you close an entire home. Okay. So if we think that it's hard enough, we already have crisis on nurses like RNs in hospitals, but those are better paying jobs. You're trying to get people. My one daughter, who I'm extremely proud of, she works for an in-home care company. I don't know about you. I would have assumed that the majority of people they employ to take care of elderly folks in their home, right? So could be 24/7. A lot of times it's somebody that goes out. It could be anything from helping them with shopping and chores. Maybe somebody has Parkinson's, but is still relatively functional. It might be a husband and wife, where the wife has dementia and the husband needs some support, to, darn near 24-hour care and everything in between. But they can still, it's a good model because they stay out of nursing homes, right? My daughter, for the company she works for, is hiring and firing people to do that, and some training, and she still has to fill in when they call off. I would have thought my stereotype would have been 80-90% young women doing that work. Probably half or more of her employees, she told me, are over 50, probably some over 60 themselves. So we have the old, like myself, I'm not picking on people, the relatively old taking care of the elderly. Okay. Well, folks like myself aren't getting any younger either. So a lot of kids, my daughter, God love her, like I said, I couldn't be any more proud. She has a heart to take care of elderly folks, and she certainly isn't doing it for the money. Most kids, my other three, and most young adults, it doesn't matter if you paid them $50 an hour, they're not going to do that work. Okay. And when you can go to Sheets or Rudders for $19 an hour, it's really, really hard to get people at $16, $17 an hour to help an elderly person go to the bathroom, so on and so forth. I don't want to be graphic, but all of the stuff that goes with that, which is some of the most admirable work you can do. And yes, we should put more money toward it. But again, $19 or $20 an hour isn't going to cut it, because a lot of people won't do that work, and Sheets and Rudders and others will just keep paying more. And we don't have the money, right? Because we've got a $2 or $3 billion shortfall. Why don't we have the money? Why don't we have the people? Because our economic policy is atrocious. Because instead of being number 3 or 4 in the country on economic prosperity and development, we're 40th, 45th, because of all of these stupid environmental regulations that are excessive. We're not talking about lead in the schools or bad drinking water. We're talking about absolute nonsense. Okay, I have a farmer in my district who DEP's been harassing for 2 or 3 years because he had a third of an acre, supposed wetlands that didn't stay wet, that did nothing but breed mosquitoes, and he planted grass. He didn't blacktop it. He didn't dump motor oil. Okay. He planted pristine grass, for which they want to fine him $60-some thousand. He's incurred $100,000 or more in legal fees. They want to come and take 2.5 or 3 acres of his land as a punishment, pure punitive, and then have him spend another $50,000 or $100,000 excavating and doing all the things or more like that. This is the kind of nonsense that's going on. Permits that take 3 months in Virginia to build a building are taking 1.5 to 2 years in Pennsylvania. They've made some progress on working through the backlogs, but it's still just nonsense. We're literally shooting ourselves in the foot. We should be an economic powerhouse, and all of these stupid policies. Same thing with getting, PennDOT to approve a stoplight or this or that. Eventually people they don't have the time to waste on this nonsense. So they go somewhere else. And where we're really paying the price is going to be our seniors who are aging, whether in their home or in a nursing home. Those people, by the way, generally had fewer children. Those children are more mobile. So there's a good chance they don't even live in Pennsylvania. So not only do we have more seniors living longer than ever, but most of them have fewer adult children than a generation ago. So a lot of that care provided for elders, if you think about it, is traditionally provided by free of charge by adult children. Okay. My parents have two children, my brother and I. Luckily, we live in Pennsylvania and we would do all we can to take care of them. Right. But my mother came
Right.
from a family of four, my dad from a family of six. Okay. So a lot of people don't have their adult children living nearby. Some of them aren't even willing to help. So they're going to have to be paying for care that traditionally was provided by adult children because those children have left Pennsylvania in search of better jobs or whatever the case may be. It is a huge crisis. There is no way to create more people magically other than through and to some extent, by not taxing pensions, we're encouraging retirees to move to Pennsylvania. There was just a report out about a year ago, and it had like the top 10 places to retire in the country, and like 4 or 5 of the cities, including I think York and Harrisburg, were on the list. And you're like, well, why is that? And of course, we live in a wonderful area, but part of that is because we don't tax pensions. And I'm not hung up on taxing pension, but the problem is, it's not that I'm wanting to tax Pennsylvanians, but we are attracting people from other states who never contributed to our state's roads and bridges and schools, who now come here because they don't get taxed on the pension. They do get stuck with the property tax, but if you're moving from New York or New Jersey or Maryland, houses, you can get as much or more house for half the price. So the property tax isn't the end of the world. So we've got bad economic policy, mainly anti-business or business unfriendly, and the elderly are going to pay a terrible price for that. So smart immigration is maybe the only solution I can think of. Smart legal immigration, and maybe if you're coming here and you're willing to work in one of these critically important fields, I don't know. Maybe we help with green cards or whatever the case may be, assuming again that you're legal and hardworking and all of that good stuff.
So going back to getting, I guess, young workers to go there, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there's like 11,000 jobs that you don't need a college education for. They're paying $86,000 a year, and we're not sending our young ones there to those jobs. I mean, I think we need more apprenticeship programs or more pro-tech schools around Pennsylvania than just York Pro-Tech or maybe YTI, and or getting our more high school kids to go to York Pro-Tech or YTI after college in order to bring in that income that is most needed, instead of pushing them away from going to college. Because I mean, the top people that usually go to college are making what they need for that degree is like 20%, and you're talking engineers, you're talking doctors, you're talking nurses and stuff like that. Most of the other percent are going to college and not getting a job within that field that they want, that they did the degree for. And so that's a waste of money, taxpayer money.
You hit the nail like squarely on the head. Pardon me. So these statistics are about 5 or 6 years old. I can't imagine they've changed much. Might have gotten a little better, may well have gotten worse. To your point, 46% of kids that go to college in 6 years have no degree at all, meaning they've dropped out. Okay. So they largely did nothing more than waste time and money, which is always an interesting question I have when we talk about free college. First of all, it's not free. It's taxpayer funded. Free college would be professors donating their time and alumni paying to maintain the buildings. It's taxpayer paid. It's not free. It's just like breakfast for kids in school. Shapiro says, well, we got free breakfast. It's not free. It's taxpayer paid. Okay. It's not free. Okay. So in any event, that being, as it may or whatever, 46% of our kids that go to college have no degree at all, nothing to show for it in 6 years. They've done largely nothing but waste time and money. So that begs the question, if we're going to pay for college, do you not at least have to graduate, or can you just go and party for a year and a half, drop out, and we still pay for that? Obviously, I'm opposed to paying for any of it. I think college is an investment, just like the stock market or anything else. If you want to go to college, pay to go to college, take out loans, win a scholarship, whatever you got to do. We do have a network of state schools where we've kept tuition flat for 6 or 7 years. In any event, 46%, give or take, almost half of the kids that go to college have no degree at all in 6 years. It's never going to be, zero. You don't want to lower your academic rigor and standards, which I'm concerned is occurring now for some of these colleges to try to they're desperate for students. Okay. Then there's a whole nother percent, and I don't know what that number is, but to your point, I would be shocked if it's not at least 10 or 15% of college graduates who never get a job in their field. Meanwhile, also to your point, we don't have nearly enough auto mechanics. I was just talking to a guy a couple of weeks ago, acquaintance of mine that has a body shop. There is virtually nobody under 40 or 50 that can do that work. Okay. Are there a few okay. Yes. Okay. Are there nearly enough to backfill the 50 and 60-year-olds that are doing it now and that are going to be retiring in, 1 to 10 years? I had some drywallers in my home here a year or so ago. Both of these gentlemen, I think one was 68 and one was 72, and he was about ready to shut down. There is no replacement plan. Okay. So, and most of that is immigrant labor. In our area, we have Amish labor. I'm in a condo up the street here. They're doing siding. I noticed that was Amish workers there because the Amish they keep having lots of kids, right? And good for them. Thank goodness we have legal immigrants coming here wanting to work. So, not the illegal variety that are mainly coming here, for handouts and so forth, or as basically human fodder for the drug cartels. And thank goodness President Trump has totally ended almost all of that at the border. In any event, so we don't have, so York Vo-Tech, an incredibly great school. Dr. Rogers there, as well as his predecessor, have done great work. They've increased the academic standards, by the way, as well. They have, again, don't quote me on the exact number. They are turning away, I think, about 400, 500, 600 kids a year. Okay. We are out of capacity at Vo-Tech. It's not that the kids don't want to go. We are out of capacity. Okay. By the way, by far the largest school contributing to Vo-Tech, they contribute 400 students, give or take. The next closest is about 175. I'll give you okay. Do you have a guess who the top school is sending kids to Vo-Tech?
I want to say Southwestern School District.
You guys do some really neat things out there within your community because you're pretty far from Vo-Tech and you've got some great businesses there. York High, okay, because kids want to escape these schools, okay. All the meantime, we've got the Democrats and Governor Shapiro in Harrisburg wanting to kill cyber charter schools because the public schools don't want to compete because of the teachers' unions. Greatest single evil in the state is the teachers' unions, not teachers. My brother's a great kindergarten teacher. There's lots of great teachers unions. They do not have the best interest of children in mind. They're the ones pushing a lot of this propaganda, political propaganda, and a lot of this nonsense we were talking about. This woke nonsense that's really child abuse, as we were talking at the start of the program with some of the gender identity and all of that. Teachers unions, just pure evil, in my opinion. They're killing our education system. Again, not teachers, but the teachers unions. They've way overstepped their bounds. Unfortunately, they have a ton of money. And they donate a lot of that to the Democrats, and they have almost all of them and a couple of Republicans in their back pocket. In any event, York Vo-Tech, my idea, and in fairness, I should have done more to champion this the last few years, and it's something I want to come back to. It's not my purview per se, but I can use the platform to help maybe facilitate or some of this. And we've seen definitely a lot of the high schools have expanded their tech offerings. So that's good. And I think from what I understand, pardon me, Southwestern and or Hanover school districts are probably at the top of that list. I think it's because you have a lot of industry out there that have the need for the workers and have been willing to put money toward it. Plus, York Tech is in the best geographic location it could be. I don't think if you had a single location in York County, it could be any better than right there off the Queen Street exit. Plus, it's in my district, so I like that. But it's right off 83. However, if you're out in Peach Bottom or Fallen Grove, I represent Fallen Grove. If you're out in out in Hanover where you are, if you're way up in Dillsburg or whatever, now they don't use York Tech. They use the Cumberland, I think it's the Cumberland School. But in any event, that's a pretty long drive to York Tech. So, I think that's also part of the reason that you've done a little more in Southwestern and Hanover than most schools. But most of those other schools are expanding their offerings, which is great. But you have a challenge with getting teachers. One advantage that VOTech has is if you're teaching tech, not the general ed classes, I believe their teachers are subject to all of the regular requirements. But if you're teaching tech, like, paint shop or body shop work and painting, or, you're teaching HVAC, all the different things they do, those teachers still have to have certain certifications, but they don't have to have a full typical 4-year teaching degree and all of the things that go with it. So, and it's still hard to find instructors. But my idea would be that we take the 6 or 7 most popular programs and we offer them, we create some satellites. Okay. So, and I'm just making this part up, but let's just say we had a satellite down in Red Lion, okay, at the Red Lion High School, or maybe further, wherever, maybe even further south and east. Let's say we put one up in the northeastern area. You could have let Tech run that, the tech piece of it. But a Dallastown kid or a Red Lion kid or a Southeastern, meaning Kennerdale kid, or whomever, could go to that satellite, let's say in the morning or the afternoon. They could still do their gen ed classes at their home school. So the tech piece is not burdened with that. Okay. We could let tech hire the teachers because it's easier for them to hire and vet teachers, and they know what they're doing. Okay. Now, you wouldn't be able to offer every program, body shop, for example. I've been there. I've actually spray painted some motorcycle engines and stuff. That takes up a lot of space. Stuff that takes up a lot of space or requires high dollar machinery, you may not be able to replicate. But things like welding, small engine repair, some of the nursing stuff they do, physical therapy, there's a number of things they could do. Take the 6 or 8 least capital intensive, most popular courses and offer them at a satellite, that sits down in, Red Lion or down in Hopewell Township or something, that sits out your way, whatever. Kids in the Northeast, maybe Dover and Northeastern and whomever, can go there. Because the other thing that would do, so it's like a force multiplier. We can get more scale, accommodate more kids without continuing to invest just in campus. And also it would be more cost effective, especially if, and this is a big if, but if some of those schools had land and or space we could tap into. The other thing that does is you will have even more kids take advantage of that if they don't have to leave their home school, because there's lots of kids that like to take the tech path, but they still want to be a Dallastown Wildcat or a Southeastern Ram, or a Southwestern Mustang, whatever the case may be. They still want to go to prom there. They still want to graduate from there. They still want to play, they want to play sports there. They want to do the band there. Tech has some great offerings, but they don't have the full plethora of sports. They may not be as strong on certain, I don't want to pick on Tech. They might have a great band program, but Central, for example, is famous. I think they have a very strong band program. So you might have a kid that wants to go the tech route, the trade school type route, but they don't want to leave Central because they care about music, whatever the case may be. Drama programs. Tech has done a great job, to be clear. But they don't have all of the sports. They just can't be all things to all people. So I think we could get more capacity, turn away fewer kids, and also accommodate more kids. In addition to, again, what some of the schools are already doing. I think most of I know Dallastown has a modest welding program, and they do some great things on engineering with design drafting and all that. So I don't want to take away from what a lot of the schools are already doing. In the case of Southeastern, they want to do some things with like agriculture technology, but I think we could expand tech. The other thing is we coming back to the budget. The first thing I would cut, and I voted against it all but one time. I voted for it actually last year only because we finally at least flatlined them. We made some progress, so I wanted to acknowledge that, support our leadership with a vote. We have a state school college network, right? It's called the PASHE schools, the Pennsylvania System of Higher Education. That's Shippensburg, that's Millersville, it's Westchester, it's Slippery Rock. But and a lot of those schools are doing just fine. Westchester is the only one that's actually been growing, but I think Shippensburg, Millersville, they kind of hold their own. Okay. But we have a number of these schools, Clarion, Bloomsburg, sort of, the one that's up in Erie that escapes me all the time. Mansfield is one of the biggest examples. Cheney outside of Westchester. These schools have seen drops in enrollment of 30, 40, 50%. Okay. There was some consolidation done a few years ago. They didn't get rid of any campuses. They just consolidated administration. There's some savings there, but they're just chipping away at the edges. Probably 5 or 6 of those schools should either go away or be converted, to your point, to trade schools. We have Penn Tech, which is a great school up in Williamsport. We have Thaddeus Stevens over in Lancaster. We could use 2 or 3 more, I would suspect, across the state. And maybe there's different specialties depending where they are. Some might be energy centric. Some might even be, we got to get creative. Like I was talking on nursing care, maybe student nurses ought to have to work, 6 months or a year in a nursing home or similar facility, rather than taking a couple of filler classes in college. We got to start getting really creative on workforce. But we give the PASHE schools like 550 or more million a year. Okay. We give Penn State, Pitt, and Temple, okay, which are for all intents and purposes private universities. Okay. We have a token board member at Penn or 2 at Penn State. I'm not even sure about Pitt and Temple. They're called the non-preferred. Our whole PASHE network of state schools, which I think is 14 or 15 campuses. Again, that's the best of the rocks, all that. Many of which were originally created as teacher colleges, and they were scattered around the state. Transportation was an issue. A lot of the population has shrunk in those rural parts of the state. Plus, you can do online, so on and so forth. Transportation is much less of an issue. So that 14 or 15, first of all, probably ought to be 8 or 10, and 2 or 3 ought to be trade schools. Okay, probably save us a couple $100 million in the process. Okay, but we give them 550, 570, 580, something like that. We're giving Pitt, Penn State, and Temple over 600 million, like 650 million. Now, come back to that budget deficit of 2 or 3 billion. That's a nice starting point right there. Okay. Those schools between them have combined endowments of over $10 billion. Pitt has over $5 billion at last check. Penn State has over $4 billion. Temple's over $1 billion. Okay. Why are we sending taxpayer dollars there? Okay. I don't get it. Okay. And they're still, closing the Penn State York branch and 3 or 4 other branches. Why we continue to send money there? If the student population in Pennsylvania is reducing, okay, then you come to the public schools. We keep giving them more and more money, including with no accountability. A lot of these schools, not in York County, other than York High, they're producing proficiency rates on math and English of anywhere from 0 to 8 or 9%. And they say, just give us more money. And that's ridiculous. That's like giving your worst employee the biggest raise, hoping they'll somehow become a good employee. That's like General Motors years ago, instead of getting rid of Pontiac because nobody wanted a Pontiac, saying we're going to keep spending more and more money on this and throwing good money after bad. It's ludicrous. Okay. They have no accountability. Okay. They need more competition. These kids ought to have lifeline scholarships like we proposed. If you're in the bottom 10 or 15% of schools, you ought to be able to go to a school of your choice with money that we provide you. The money needs to follow the student. The same thing with college. I'm not sure the state should even be in the college business. There's plenty of options out there. If we want to maintain a leaner, meaner state school system, that's fine. But continuing to throw money at those big three, continuing to throw money at failing public schools, again, most of those are not York County, to be clear, all while trying to bankrupt the cyber charters, which people, just like they're fleeing to Votech, they're fleeing to the cyber charters. We saw that during COVID. Okay. These kids want to escape these failing schools. And all we're doing, thanks to the teachers unions, is trying to continue to keep them trapped there and throw more and more tax dollars at it at the expense of a much needed rainy day fund and other programs for the elderly and others, with, again, no accountability for their outcomes. It's nonsense. And as a business guy, it just drives you crazy. But anyway, that's some of the areas I would look at. Get as I said earlier, the people that don't need it. We can always take care of our
problem that I see,
people, but getting able-bodied people back to work and getting more business back to the state are some of the main things we got to do. We got to rein in the nonsensical spending. There's some spending that's certainly important. We do have an obligation to fund the public schools, but that doesn't mean we have an obligation to continue to throw more and more money with no accountability. The student population is dropping, yet they keep hiring more and more administrators. I think across the state, there's been an increase in administration of about 30%, while our student population has dropped. I don't know what those are, 5, 10, 15%. It's just absolutely crazy.
If the money could follow the student, would they not have to pay the school tax then?
No, generally, no. You would still have the taxes, and again, how you tax. There's a lot of debate on the best way to do that. As we talked earlier, I think that property tax approach is antiquated and unfair. The other problem with that, by the way, is, and this is one of the reasons you haven't seen more action on property tax. It penalizes areas like ourselves that have still maintained or slightly grown our population, and it rewards these rural and other areas, in some cases urban areas as well, where the population is shrinking. We have something called hold harmless, which means even if your student population shrinks, you still get at least the same or more money from the state. So you've got a number of districts around areas around the state where their property taxes aren't as bad as ours. The main people with property tax issues are South Central Pennsylvania, which is us, of course, and the Pocono region, the Lehigh Valley, Pocono area, where it's even a bigger problem up there. So unfortunately, a lot of places, particularly rural or urban, where the populations have shrunk, their property taxes are a lot lower than ours, because their school budgets, instead of getting 20-25% from the state, they might be getting 70 or more percent of their funding from the state. So that's one of the reasons we haven't, this cry for property tax reform, which I fully support, again, on school property tax, is not statewide. You combine that with scaring seniors because they hear about taxing pensions, despite the fact 90% of them will save more on property tax or rent than they would on taxing the pension. And you got the teachers unions putting pressure on the politicians because they don't want to do anything that's going to curb revenue coming in. And see, keep in mind, there was a thought earlier I didn't finish. It's much easier to raise taxes, much easier to raise taxes at the local level than the state level. So when you rely on property tax, you only need 5 out of 9 board members to raise your taxes. If it's driven by the state through sales and income tax, you need the House of Representatives, you need the Senate, and you need the governor. And if you don't get it done in 2 years, the clock resets and you got to do it all over again. So as messed up as we are in a lot of our economic policy, again, regulatory being the worst, we actually have not increased sales or income tax in like 40 or 50 or 50 or 60 years. One of them's a little more recent than the other, but give or take, it's been 40 years or more that we've raised those taxes. And that's because it's hard to raise taxes at the state level, which is a good thing. But you got to get 102 representatives to vote for it, 26 senators and 1 governor, as opposed to 5 out of 9 school board members. So many of whom, by the way, parents, and are skewed toward, that's something I learned in my time on school board. is, well, it's for the kids. It's for the kids. It's very easy to spend other people's money. And I'm like, well, we're elected by the voters, the taxpayers. I'm here as a representative for the taxpayer. Yes, I'm a parent. Yes, I love kids. I adopted 4 kids. I adopted 4 of them. So nobody's going to say who loves kids more than me, play that card. But we need to be stewards of people's money. And, you need a lot more accountability. And part of fairness, the schools are dealing with a lot more challenges now, a lot more, there's a consequence to all these broken families, to a lot of the mental illness. We see big increases in autism and so forth. So there is a lot more burden on the school. So I don't want to be too black and white about it either, because there's a lot of nuance here. But at some point, just like any family budget, you only have so much money and you got to make the most of it. You can't just keep throwing money at everything without accountability, without more efficiency and streamlining. So, which, by the way, is another challenge on the elder care. A lot of industries you can automate, and this is a big part of what we did in my time at St. Ange, was how much automation can a company justify versus using labor. We started to see with the labor shortages, we started to traditionally you would justify automation because it would save money, on return on investment. So typically, real easy rule of thumb was, if I get a 3-year or less return on investment, I'm probably going to automate. If it's 5 or 6 years or more, I'm probably not. But then you started to see industries who justifying automation because they just simply couldn't find the people. So they had to automate because they couldn't. There was no other option. Does that make sense? We saw this with case picking of soda, 2 a.m, a Pepsi distributor in Georgia. It's like years ago, we saw it coming. It's like, well, we can't get the people to do it. Nobody wants to do this. They got better options. So you started to see automated case handling in that example, justified less on ROI and more just on a necessity. I share that because that's another big challenge with elder care. And yes, there are some novel things that are being done with AI and maybe eventually robotics. But in general, those jobs are very hard to automate. There's not a big return on investment. They're just inherently hard to automate. Plus, you want human interaction with elderly. So to come in and say, well, we're going to automate a nursing home the same way we automate a warehouse, that's just not going to happen. Not anytime soon. Probably smarter people than me that have, again, there's some efficiency you can drive there. But a lot of times you can deal with labor shortages through automation. In my assessment, unless I'm really missing something, which is always possible, the whole realm of elder care and medical care is challenging to automate. Now, we've seen hospitals do some unique things. They can have vision systems, for example, that detect if a patient falls out of bed. Some really neat things. AI is very scary, along with robotics. The combination of the two, a lot of stuff we need to be concerned about. But diagnosing disease and things like that, where you got 20 different data points that might be hard for a doctor to process and say, hey, this person's in kidney failure or whatever it may be. There's some exciting things that can occur there. As far as replacing bedside labor, taking someone to the bathroom, taking them out shopping, anything in between, cleaning them up when they need it, bathing. I think, unless somebody's got something up their sleeve I'm not aware of, and it still wouldn't be a real great solution because you wouldn't have that human interaction. I don't think there's any automated solution coming anytime soon. So that's where I see as much of the crisis as we have with workforce in general, I think it's really going to come to a head with elder care.
So that would mean that nurses would always be in demand, or CNAs would always be in demand.
I would find it very hard to believe that almost all medical professions, and again, I'm not an expert. Maybe there's some people out there shaking their head because they know something I don't. But I would think that nurses and the like, there's nurses, and then, well, to your point, there's RNs, there's LPNs. I think we need to be also, we got to get more flexible on cross training. For example, an LPN with 5 or 10 years experience and maybe a certification or two, 9 times out of 10 should probably be able to do most everything an RN can. There's too much emphasis on education. Education's important, but too much emphasis on education and not enough on experience, in my opinion, from what I think I've learned in talking to doctors and nurses and different experts. And that's another way we can help with the workforce, is to have more flexibility. So, you might have, things where we typically use a doctor for that you don't really need a doctor. I mean, I use the example, I typically go to the dentist a couple times a year. Hygienist cleans my teeth, looks around, and then the dentist comes in for 10 or 15, 5 minutes or whatever they do, to charge whatever they charge for that. Nine times out of 10, I don't even need them there. The hygienist is cleaning the teeth. If they see a problem, then call the dentist in. Same thing with, I don't know, wart removal. There's got to be things that we can train people, take a 6, 8, 10 day or 6 or 8, 10 week, whatever's appropriate class to make you the world's greatest wart zapper. Okay. I don't necessarily need a dermatologist doing that, but the 1 out of 10 cases where something doesn't look right, then call them in. You see what I'm saying? I think similarly, and again, I'm the one to decide exactly how to do this, but we got a lot of nurses that are bogged down with paperwork and time at the computer rather than the bedside. And I think in some cases there's jobs that we could cross train people. Okay. We'd have to do it smartly. But looking simply at what degree you came out of school with, while that's important, that doesn't tell the whole story. Again, maybe somebody that doesn't have the time or money or even book smarts in some cases to go through a full bachelor's degree RN program. Maybe they get trained as a phlebotomist to draw blood for, which is a matter of weeks, and then they go to WellSpan, and this happens clear, but they continue to train and cross train them on other things they could do. There's people that I think, again, you have to pick the right people with a proven track record with a certain number of years experience, but there's people that could do a lot of the things that a nurse does who may not have a nursing degree. And there's probably things nurses could do that the doctor's doing and so forth. Because the alternative is going to be no care at all. Okay. We had a bill in the House a while back that said, well, we are going to allow supposedly every school child in the state, I don't know what grades, maybe every grade, I don't know what it was. The law was some group of grades of children were supposed to see a dentist every year. First of all, that's the parent's job, not the school's job, but that's a whole other issue. But we had we had a bill that said, well, we'll allow a hygienist to do it. And somebody said, well, isn't a dentist better than a hygienist? It's like, well, I think it depends on the dentist and it depends on the hygienist, first of all. But second of all, we had 100 of our 500 schools where they couldn't even find a dentist. So the alternative was nothing. So would you rather wait for a dentist? You let better be the victim of best. Would you rather insist on having a dentist look at your teeth and you end up with nobody looking at it, or having a hygienist do it who can then flag any major problems? If the kid's got gum disease or whatever, then certainly flag that to the parents and get them to the dentist. We got to start getting, and that's a simple example, I realize, but I think there's a lot of examples. I had neck surgery a couple years ago now. And I talked to some of the nurses throughout that process. And there's a couple instances, when I'm under the knife, you probably want a very experienced RN there, or whatever the case may be, with the surgeon, right? And I certainly want a surgeon and a doctor, okay, not somebody that just cross-trained for a few weeks. But that's a lot different than going to the skin doctor and getting a wart zapped on my finger. And if it happens, those are two very, very different things, okay? And second of all, going back to my neck surgery, there's certain points in that process where I asked him, I said, does this really require an RN to do that? Does it require an RN to take my blood pressure and ask me how much I weigh, how old I am, and what I'm allergic to? Well, no. And of course they do there's instances where we're using, some of this is occurring, to be clear, with nurse assistants and expanding, but we're going to have to, I think, get a lot more creative and bring in more and more common sense, because if we insist on best, we're going to get nothing because we simply don't have the people. So, I'm not trying to I think in some cases the quality of care would be just as good, if not even better, frankly, because we should look at people's skill sets, not just the degree they happen to have acquired 20 years earlier.
I do find that kind of weird that you don't say I'm going to call the dental assistant for appointment. You say I'm going to call it for appointment. I'm not going to call the registered nurse for a doctor's appointment. I'm calling the doctor, and then you get the registered nurse or you get the dental assistant to do everything.
Well, and I don't know this for a fact because I'm old, but not that old. Compared to you, I'm old, but I suspect is probably the way I should put it. A lot of this stuff, a lot of these requirements. I mean, medical schools for years, and maybe even still, were notorious over. We want to fail out a certain number. We're going to weed out students based on if they can pass organic chemistry or not, or some advanced math class. Whereas in my mind, if I'm getting my neck worked on, or hopefully I don't ever have to get it, but if I ever have to get a hip replaced or something, I don't really care what you knew about organic chemistry. I want to know how good a carpenter you are. I want to know if your hands are steady and if you can cut in a straight line. So traditionally they were, but that was to reduce competition, right? So we don't want to put out, I'm making up numbers here, but we don't want to graduate 3,000 new doctors a year. We only want to graduate 1,200 because we don't want to create too much competition for the existing doctors. Okay. And that happened. And it's the same thing, nursing and everybody wanted to have a certification. We want to have a certification because then we're certified. Well, then we saw during COVID and the lockdowns, the state weaponize those licenses and certifications against those people. I mean, do you really need a license to cut hair? Okay. You might need a certain education. You might need to say, hey, I went to barber school so you don't cut people, or my other daughter is a hairstylist. There's some serious chemicals you're using with hair color. I'm not saying you shouldn't have to have training. Okay. But do you need the state to certify all of this? And then come in and weaponize it against you, and especially today, we have plenty of ways to weed out bad doctors, bad nurses, bad hairstylists, bad anything. It's called Yelp, right? It's called word of mouth. It's never been easier to put it out there in a public forum, usually fair, sometimes sometimes not always fair reviews. But over time, just like if a restaurant's bad, the word spreads, right? And we don't need the government to do that. Okay. You need the government to do certain things. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if they're, Medicare fraud and you need to check the restaurant to make sure there aren't rats running around out back that we might not see. But in general, a lot of this, the system naturally, competition and the court of public opinion naturally weeds a lot of this out. But, people went, and it's the same thing. We were talking about unions earlier. We have this crazy apprenticeship ratio that my friend Barb Glime's trying to get changed up she's from Cumberland County. I think the best rep in the state, where you got to have 4 journeymen for every 1 apprentice, no matter what the work is. Now that might make sense if you're, 300 feet in the air working, on the, working on the Ben Franklin Bridge or something outside of Philly, but not if you're painting a wall in an office building, but a lot of that, I think, was designed. The legacy of that was to protect jobs. A lot of this is around job protection. And I'm not picking on nurses, by the way. We're just using them as an example. But, we want to require this. This should require an RN. Well, in some cases, maybe it should. And there was maybe there's some safety issues there. But part of that is, we want to protect job. We don't want an LPN with 10 years of experience who's a fabulous nurse being able to do this. So that's why a lot of them ended up, nursing homes or whatever. So there's places where it makes sense. Like I said, I don't want Steven Carr, nothing personal, taking a 10-week class and then cutting into my vertebrae. Okay. I want Dr. Weiner, who's fantastic. I'll put a plug in for him doing that. Okay. I want him to have gone to medical school and everything. I don't really care if he took organic chemistry, though. But we're just going to be for necessity. Some of this will happen out of necessity, and in Wellspan, some very creative things. Cool. They just started here a very progress with that. They're using AI and some other things. They're not perfect either. I get calls about, certainly issues around care and everything, but I think a lot of that workforce issues, and they've got to compete with other hospitals all around us. But some of these things are occurring. You've seen it in industry for a long time, So again, I'm biased because I come from a world where I've seen what we did was generally make things more efficient and smart use of automation and so forth. And again, some of that is occurring, to be clear. I just think we need to get the state out of the way when it comes to unnecessary regulation, licensing, regulations, and still have accountability. Again, still have accountability, but get out of the way and allow more flexibility on the workforce side, because we're not just going to create people out of thin air. I'm impressed you stayed awake this long. Let me ramble on, but these are very, very critically important issues that I think I've learned a fair amount about in the last 7 years. A lot of stuff I don't know. You didn't hear me talk about farming. You didn't hear me talk about Veterans Affairs. You didn't hear me talk about case law and that kind of stuff. But I think on the area of business and competitiveness and workforce efficiency, there's some things I feel like I know a lot more now than I did. I brought some things to the table, but I certainly have learned a lot in the last 7 years. And this is the thing I want to keep putting a spotlight on. And I'm proud to say the Democrat leader in the House even stole my line a couple months ago, and he said, "We're getting older, smaller, and poorer." I kind of coined that phrase about 5-6 years ago, and I had a couple of my colleagues say, Mike, he just used your line. So the point is, if we keep beating that drum, maybe we'll eventually make some progress. And as I've had, some very great charitable organizations in particular come visit us in Harrisburg, typically looking for more money in the budget, I've started to explain that while you might not think this has anything to do with Alzheimer's care or special needs adults, believe it or not, DEP and others are hindering our ability to help you because, like we've said many times, they're making us uncompetitive. They're chasing away our businesses. They're chasing away the tax revenue in the process, and they're chasing away the human capital called working aged adults and their children who follow the jobs. So we better get our act together very quickly. The good news is we still have the potential to be an absolute economic powerhouse. There's probably no state in the country, or very few, that are blessed with the rich traditions, specifically manufacturing, with the energy that's underneath our feet, and with our geography in Pennsylvania. So we have the potential there, but we continue to shoot ourselves in the foot, and that's got to stop. And that is why we have a huge budget impasse, because currently the only two options are spend too much or spend way too much. And that's not good.
Right. Yeah. Well, it is now almost 12 o'clock, and so we're just going to wrap it up. Where can people find you or contact you to get involved in your campaign or to get involved in your district?
Well, I hope people start to get more vocal and connect the dots on business policy. That's one of my big things. To answer your question, I appreciate you saying that. I have a website, Jones for PA, Jones, FORPA.com. That has all the information there on supporting. The big thing I'd like to plug is we have, I did only my second Harrisburg fundraiser this year, just a couple of weeks ago in 7 years. But in the district, I never really do more than two. And this year I'm only doing one fundraiser, but it's become one of the biggest and best in the county. And we get sponsors and try to keep the costs down. And it's called Politics at the Farm. And it's going to occur Monday evening, October 27th, 6 to 8 p.m. outside of Felton down in North Hopewell Township. And we're going to have the thing that's really exciting this year is our headliner is going to be, we're going to have a number of the other reps, and Senator Phillips Hill should be there in addition to myself, of course. But we're going to have Stacey Garrity, who is our state treasurer and our candidate for governor, who I think is our best chance at defeating Governor Shapiro next year. And the food is fantastic. We do pit beef, and I think there's pit ham and pit turkey as well. There's fresh cut fries. We have South County beer. We have some wine. We have a plethora of great side dishes donated by Round the Clock Diner. We're going to have Beck's ice cream. And it's obviously, if people want to sponsor, that's great. And to attend, though, is only $30. And if it's a couple, $50. So save a little bit there as a couple. It's a really good, informative evening. Like I said, a lot of good food. We had a lot of people last year, about 175 people or so. We're hoping to break 200 this year and come out and show a lot of support for Stacey. Again, that's Monday the 27th. And should be easy enough to find that on. I'll put it on my Facebook page, and I know the Republican Party has been sending out some emails and so forth. So would certainly appreciate any support you can give to that, both for myself and for Stacey.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, Mike Jones, and for coming on my show.
Thank you, Steven. I appreciate you having me.
Yep. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, brother.